Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum's July edition of Drink and Draw. After a month hiatus in June, we are back. And so welcome and thank you for joining us. We got all the usual suspects here tonight. Molly's up there. And of course, we have Yvette with us. Just a couple notes before we get started. I would like to say thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support. All the free programming that we get to put on virtually is all because of their generous sponsorship and contributions. And I also would like to thank our sponsor, Generac Power Systems, for their continued support as well. Without those two organizations, we would not be able to put on all the free virtual programming that we do. To include tonight's Drink and Draw. Just before we get started, I'd like to let everybody know that we do have our security features turned on tonight. So if you need to ask any questions or any clarification on anything, you can send a chat message on Zoom here to either Molly or I, and we will make sure that Yvette gets those notes. Other than that, though, I hope everybody has fun. Yvette, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and welcome.
Thanks, Eric. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Drink and Draw. We're really excited to see you here tonight. And let me see, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight myself. We're really excited to have you here this evening after our month off. We're going to be doing something a little bit different tonight, maybe hopefully interesting to everybody that's here. But I thought we've been spending a lot of time on different techniques, drawing techniques like colored pencil, watercolor, and we haven't really revisited portraits in a long time, which I want to do. We're going to focus a little bit on a portrait tonight, but I'm going to do a little different spin of it. Some of you may know I do a lot of graphic design for the museum. So I do have a background in graphic design and do a lot of computer graphics. Don't worry, we're not going to be doing computer graphics tonight. But one of the things that I wanted to share with everybody was how that graphic sensibility sometimes overlaps in my drawing background and vice versa. They sort of work off of each other, and the longer I do this, the more I see them influencing each other. So what I thought was we could visit one of my favorite pieces in our collection, one of my favorites in our archive. And the difference between archive and objects is our archive includes scrapbooks, photographs, letters, a lot of what you would think of paper materials versus like the three-dimensional objects of a vest or a uniform. And this comes from the Joseph Chavala collection, and I may be pronouncing his last name incorrectly. So if anybody out there knows how to pronounce Chvala, that's the Joseph Chavala collection, and I'll be sharing the link with that as well. If you are not familiar with our Drink and Draw, most of you guys I've seen here before, but if you are not familiar with how this works, we post the images that I'll be working on at our museum website. Molly, I did send Eric the link. I'm not sure. There it is. He put it up there. So Eric just posted the link to the web page site where you can see all these images. I'm going to be working off my iPad tonight, so you will actually be able to see the image I'm working on in real time while I'm working on it. Because this is Drink and Draw, the background of Drink and Draw is for all of us to just sit around and maybe have a subject or a topic and to draw and maybe learn some new skills, but really it's just about sharing some ideas about drawing using the collection of the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. But, you guys didn't come here to listen to me just talk tonight, so I figure maybe we can jump right in. Again, if you have any questions, you can use the chat function, and I'm going to stop sharing on this one. Let's see here. Molly, can you take, oh, never mind, I see it now. And I'm going to share my screen. Can you let's make Veteran Print Project, we'll spotlight. Well, I guess if I share my screen, it'll just be, so let me just share my screen. All right. So all of you should be able to see now let me know if you can't see in the screen. I'm going to pull my chat up so I can see the chat at the same time. But you should be able to see. This is a picture of Mr. Shavala, and he was actually, give me 1 second. My Zoom on my computer went full screen, and I needed that to be able to read from that. All right, so Mr. Shavala was in the United States Navy in World War II, and he was a pilot, and he served as a pilot for the PB-4Y-1, which is the naval patrol version of the B-24 Liberator. And they were a patrol bombing squadron during World War II, and they were an anti-submarine patrol unit. So I'm just going to call it the B-24, the naval version of the B-24. Basically, he spent his time in the English Channel trying to, as an anti-submarine against the German U-boats, anti-submarine protection. So this is Mr. Shavala, and his scrapbook is one of my favorites because it contains a ton of, let's see, I actually see somebody with a pronunciation. Oh, koala. Okay, thank you, Margaret and Joe. So it's pronounced koala. So Joseph Koala, thank you. It's very exciting. I want to make sure I get that correct. One of the reasons that his archives is one of my favorites is because it has a scrapbook filled with black and white photographs of not only him as a pilot, but fellow pilots with the naval pilots, but also they were stationed at the Royal Air Force Base. So a lot of English pilots, and also many pictures of his time in service in England. So there's a lot of imagery, a lot of uniform imagery that I reference quite often. The only thing comparable I've seen in our collection is a wonderful collection from a WASP pilot, believe it or not. And we get to see the same uniform, but with female pilots. So it's really wonderful to compare those uniforms. What I thought for tonight, we could focus on a portrait, but one of the ways I wanted to do work on a portrait was to explore how we use background in portrait drawing. I spent a lot of time in my youth and more recently doing colored pencil portraits. I think I shared that with you before. And one of the critiques I got at an early age was you couldn't just have a floating head. You need to add some sort of background to offset the portrait. In this case, the photograph we're looking at on the screen is the plane itself would function as the background. But they would say, don't just put like a flat color, don't just have a floating head. And I could counter that argument today, but it was something that came into my mind as I was looking through these images, and where I was mentioning that the graphic content overlaps. So I thought about using in my graphic design, I use a lot of overlays. So if you were to look at this is really just a quick mock-up of sorts of how you could create a portrait. Think about using these silhouettes of the airplanes. Here's another silhouette that's added to it. And that one actually needs to go on top of this one. So where you can start to really use the graphics of what he flew, how they were in formation, alongside of this photo of him in the cockpit looking out, and then him, of course, in front of a plane. So this is what I was thinking about for tonight's project. So we're going to do a couple things. We're going to look at the B-24 in silhouette and figure out how to create these patterns in the background. Then we're going to look at this pilot's face and start working on a portrait, and then think about how we can layer them. I'm using a digital platform, so it's easy for me to do these transparencies, but we've worked in watercolor before, so you can make watercolor a little bit more transparent, or you can use the weight of how you apply your pencil lead or your ink to create this sort of transparent look as well. We're not going to have time to get into all of that, but I want you to think about that if this is something you maybe want to work on at home. I put a lot of images on that blog post, so you'll be able to see what we're working on tonight, and also you should be able to get to his oral history, not oral history, his archive on our database. So let's take this off and let's take this background off too. And let's take this guy off. And I'm going to pull up, this is an image of, well, first let's look at this really quickly because this is a fun image. And I'm trying to find my silhouette of the plane. Hang on. All right. So I'm going to flip this back around. Don't get dizzy. So this is another one of the wonderful photographs that's in his collection. This is his whole unit in front of one of the planes that they all flew. And of course, it's got the signatures on there. So what we're looking on is the straight on view of the B-24. So if we look at that in, we take the blueprint of that, and you can see, I put this image on the blog post, but I want you guys to keep in mind, this is something that I downloaded from a historical site. So I modified it to put it on the webpage because I wanted to make sure that I was following protocol for copyright. So I just wanted to share this with you using it. If you research the B-24, you'll be able to find lots of images like this online. You can also go to the Naval Air Research Center, and there's some really great information and images there. And you can see this plane in motion in flight. So if we look at the architectural renderings, the blueprints, you can see, the bird's eye view looking down at the vessel, and then you can see the straight on view, and then you can see the side view. I wanted to focus on a couple different outlines. The first was this bird's eye view where you can really get the entire shape of the plane with the 4 propellers, and then the straight on view. So what we're going to do is we're going to create what I consider a silhouette. And that's basically the solid graphic, cartoon, almost like graphic of the plane. So I'm going to outline this, and you can do this by watching and creating this as best you can freehand, or if you have a chance, you can hold your paper up to your computer screen on the blog post and you can trace on it directly, or in time, if you want to just download the image from the website and print it, you can work on this afterward. I'm just showing you how I'm going to be doing this tonight. So I'm going to get a different color, probably just to make my silhouette since I'm working on a digital platform. So I'm going to do a red, and I'm actually cancel. I'm going to make sure I'm on this layer, add a new layer. So I'm going to make sure I'm on this layer. All right. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to take my pencil, and I need to make sure I'm on the right type of pen that I want. You can do this with a ballpoint pen, a pencil, a marker, but we're going to be making this into a solid line, sorry. I actually, give me 1 second. I accidentally spit on my iPad and now it's not drawing straight lines. All right, let's try this again. So I'm not going to worry about this interior space in here because I'm going to be filling that up with color. If you're just doing this with pen and paper, then you'll be taking some time to fill in these big open areas that we're outlining. But on the computer, you're going to see how quickly I can fill those in. So a lot of story time tonight, simply because I know there's going to be some of you that are going to be trying to figure out how you want to actually create this shape for yourself. If you remember from the times that we've done this in the past, we can do shape building. So if you look at the wing, you could do a rectangle, and you could do it a little bit of a triangular shape. circle here to give yourself that wing shape. You can just start using shapes and building up shapes, square with the circle, so on and so forth. So you don't have to have the actual image to trace tonight. You can build this very easily with shape building. So I'm going to go back on. And again, this is just going to be function as a silhouette in the background. So I'm not trying to be super precise. If you were to do this on the computer, if any of you are familiar with computer drawing programs like Illustrator or Photoshop, you can use something called a trace function, or you can actually draw it with the pen tool. For tonight, I'm just going to do a quick basic trace of this plane. When you are using graphics like this for maybe a more formal project, you're going to want to be more precise, especially when it comes to military machinery. People, model builders, historians, they're very particular about the size and shape and proportions of these machines. I worked on a graphic recently for the new USS Wisconsin submarine for their association, and I'm very grateful. I'm excited to have met that group. It's a group of Navy veterans who are making it their charge to make sure that the citizens of Wisconsin are familiar with the new USS Wisconsin, the new submarine that will be launched. And so they needed a new logo head for their webpage. And for those of you that are not familiar with anything submarine, it is very difficult to find anything beneficial to help you to make sure that you're according to the right scale and size, because submarines are very, very classified. So there's some basic renderings available out there. There's some legacy drawings that are available, but really the information on submarines is extremely hard to find. And so trying to create a fun graphic that will stay true to the cause, but be genuinely honest and true to the rendering of the ship is a really difficult thing to do. They gave me a lot of reference material, but even that, it's not the easiest task. So I'm proud of what we came up with, but I do want you to know, if you are going to be using these types of images on a more formal layer, you need to do your research first, and second, you need to make sure that you act with a little bit of precision. So now that I've got this outlined, I can use my computer, and you'll see this quick little, and I can make it solid. Most of you probably can't do that while you're filling in, so you see that spaced in fill in. So I'm going to fill that in right quick. For me as a graphic designer, I always want more and more and more. And this simplicity of this is really what we're going for. So you can see that we now have that aerial view of that. We can do the same thing with this front view, and I'll come back to that, and with this front view here, and I'll come back to that here in a second. But I wanted to show you, you probably already had seen in previous screens. Now we have, let me turn this guy off. Now we have the plane that we can manipulate, right? And think about, how would you want to use this in a background? Think about wallpaper and patterns and building up different patterns. Let me get on that layer. So what I did was I started playing around with it. I started turning it. What's the best angle? You know, Top Gun Maverick just came out, and I watched it a little while back, and then again on 4th of July weekend. And you can't help but watch Top Gun and want to be on the deck of an aircraft carrier and want to be a naval pilot. I don't care who you are, you just can't watch that movie and not walk away wanting to be a Navy pilot. And so for me, there's this really beautiful, there's been a lot of historic, beautiful graphic renderings of planes in formation And they speak volumes when you start multiplying these. So if we look at one plane here heading in a direction, I can duplicate that. So the more, so you, if you are making this at home, figuring out the shapes will help you, because then you can really hopefully make more than one of these fairly quickly. You could also cut yourself out a stencil. If you were to cut out a stencil, then you could just lay it on the paper and then fill in the color as you needed to. I have the fortunate ability to use a computer right now, so you can see some of the things I played with. I was thinking about how would I do like pattern designs, what would it look like? And there's a lot of things I can do to build up patterns. For the sake of trying to make a neat image, I'm going to put these just sort of offset of one another. But when I do things like this, I'm going to change color just so I can point things out. Actually, let me put one more plane. And oops. Sorry, guys. I'm going to make one more. Now let's say I've got 3 planes and I line them up just so. You start to see what kind of pattern you want, where you want them to lie, what kind of symmetry are you looking at? And one of the things I'm looking at right now, if I were to put 4 on here, let's make one more. Say I'm going to go super symmetrical. Now we've got these 4 planes here, and they create this border, almost this framed border that now leaves us this space in here, right? So that's what I would call the negative space. We talked about positive, negative, probably a year ago, but that leaves us room if we wanted to create another graphic. The pilot has those, the cap, the notorious pilot, almost, I call it the Snoopy pilot hat, right? With the flaps on it and the goggles. If you wanted to make that's not a really great rendering of that, but if you wanted to make a silhouette out of that hat, you could put it there in the center and then do a repeated pattern that way. That gets really into like, sort of like childhood bedroom wallpaper. So not really the background of a portrait, but as a screen print artist, those are things I think of. How can I create these patterns to really make my image dynamic? One of the things we can do in that is now we can create the silhouette of the plane looking directly on, right? So I can make this one maybe a little bit, I can either leave this one this size and have it just a little bit more transparent so it's on top of these, or I could actually size it, scale it down, and put it in between the two, just like that. And then start building a pattern that way. Right? So you're thinking about how these patterns look behind a portrait. So for example, if we were going to draw Mr. Koala here, and I'm gonna move him, no, I'm on the wrong angle. Move him just down a little bit. And then I'm using a special tool on the computer that'll make him more transparent. But so you could see how you could play with transparencies and put the planes either on top of him or he's the dominating force, and then they just fall to the background, and we would make sure that pattern's repeated so that they fall to the background and not on his face. But these are things I can do on my computer. But if you're making a drawing from scratch, you can think about that and how you would create your drawing to add some of these techniques in using drawing. So for example, I could do a sketch of that and then use a watercolor pencil with a plane on top of it so that it's transparent enough to see through and you see his eye coming through the plane. This is not a great composition here, but you see where hopefully you can see where I'm going with thinking about how we would use patterns to make his portrait more dynamic so that we might end up with something similar to this, right? Something similar to having all of these different layers in there, telling his story. For me, it's about telling the story of the subject you're trying to portray. So let's take this off. Let's turn our screen back around. And now hopefully you've had a chance to draw some of your silhouettes. I'm gonna leave one of the silhouettes up. You can actually see a couple other formations I made earlier. So let me take these off. Take these guys off too. But this was something I played with earlier that you saw in the image I was sharing a second ago. So if you think about planes flying in formation, this might be something that you do in the background, and then you focus your portrait on this side. I hate to keep doing this to you guys, but you could see this way. They look transparent like that because I've used the computer program. These all started solid at the very beginning as well. But you can see how I've made it. The left side is really dark, and then as it moves to the right, they start to fade, and that's because they're fading. The way I have it set for us to draw tonight is they're fading into the portrait that we're going to start thinking about, which is this. So if you see him standing here, we're going to draw the image. I'm using the image on the left as a reference for the drawing on the right. So I'm just going to move ahead a little bit. If you need me to put one of the silhouettes back on, I could do that. But for right now, I'm going to remove them so that they're not a distraction for us to start this portrait. But again, if you need me to put one of those, why don't I just go ahead and put one of those planes back on so that if somebody wants to continue to have reference and work on their plane, they can take a look at it here. I'll put it over here. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. So obviously that's not what we're going to start drawing now. And of course, I've set myself up with a pre-started drawing here, and I do have a more completed drawing. And what I was thinking was that we could do this sketch-like drawing with a little bit of blue and black, and then have a colored background, put those silhouettes on it, and then have the view of him in the cockpit, which is this view right here.
Hey, Yvette, as you're doing that, one
Yeah.
of our audience members wants to know what medium you used for the planes. Was that something that you drew, or was that like a shape that you had pulled off another image or the internet or something like that?
Yeah, so I just drew it. I mean, they may have just checked in, but yeah, I took the image directly from, let me take his face off again. Oh, and I didn't mean to do that. Oh, I just messed up my layers, but hang on just a second. So this image is an image of the blueprint of the B-24. I actually found this online. I explained a little bit earlier. You have something similar, a modified version of this on the webpage, because I didn't want to have copyright issues, but this is basically a blueprint of this aircraft. And I traced the outline of the airplane directly from this drawing and then filled it in with color to make that silhouette. So I hope that answered it. If it didn't, let me know, and maybe I can elaborate further. But yeah, we just all walked through that together. So, and that's the image that I picked to make all of those silhouettes that we talked about. All of these are that same exact plane silhouette. And the other one that I used, in case there's confusion there, the other image that I used, which was this one, is actually the front view of this plane. So this image here creates this image here. And again, I just traced over it, created the outline, and then filled it in with color. Again, I hope that helps. We'll go ahead and take, I don't know. I keep merging all my layers together, and I'm going to end up really messing this up if I. Okay. So we're going to go back to here. I'm going to go on this layer. So now you can see, I'm going to take this image and move it. So I'm just moving that down there. So the two silhouettes that I'm working on now are on the bottom of this picture. And we're going to start working on the portrait of our pilot here. So I'm the pencil I'm using on my iPad is the tool on this iPad is going to mimic a regular 2B pencil. So that's what I'm deciding to draw the portrait with. If you have colored pencils at home you want to work with, then you're happy to take a look at your colored pencils, work on a portrait however it suits you, keeping in mind that we're hoping to use these silhouettes either in the background. And if you're drawing the portrait with me, you can draw the portrait and build your silhouette in while you're drawing the portrait. That's up to you. That's supposed to be a wing coming out there. But it's nice, especially if you can maybe make yourself a little stencil, then you can put those colors just maybe on top of the image. I like to do a little bit of layering. So I'm gonna go in here. These down here, I had basically some starter places. I'm gonna take that off and I'm gonna go with my starter. So you see where I would start the portrait, right? So basic, quick outline. Let me get the right color pencil and the right pencil to draw with. So I always just start my portraits with a circle. What we see here is he's looking off to, you know, his right, our left a little bit. So I'm going to do my center line on the face, looking to the left a little. And then if you know any proportions of portraiture, you go to split the egg down the middle, and then I'm going to split the egg down the center there. And that's usually where the end of the nose goes. And then about halfway between this point and this point and this point is another. And I'm doing these curved lines because our head is round, right? It's a globe. It's an egg shape. It's not just, you know, it's not, if I could do this and this and this, but that would be a front on look and it wouldn't actually be the shape of what our head really is. So I I always start my portraits with sort of this little roadmap for me. You do like another little quarter of a way down and then another quarter way down. And there's a very specific measurements. If you want to know the exact measurements on face portraiture, there's a lot of great tutorials online. And it's good to get to know those and to sort of etch them in your brain, because if you start drawing portraits, it just becomes second nature, like knowing that our faces are pretty much almost like 5 eyes across. So the width of his eye here, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across. And it's amazing how often that works out. And I'm going to do this instead of erase. But this is the basic, this here. This is basically how I start. I get myself a little egg, a little line work, and you can see I did that here. I already started creating some of his hat, but that's just to keep my proportions in order. We're going to come down, and he's got a very square jaw, so I'm squaring this off just to keep me in place. I have a tendency to go outside of proportions. I like to expand further and bigger than my paper, and that's a bad habit of mine, but I've owned it, and so it's become a style of mine. But if you are just starting out on portraits, you want to make sure that you are laying out your proportions at the beginning and try to stick to them, because it's very easy to find yourself going off of the page, and for me, it just becomes more difficult as you go along. So yeah, you just want to start making sure this is, I worked on this afternoon, so I know already that I had already made his jawline too short, and it changed the whole personality of his face. And I personally think he's got a lot of personality in his face, so it's important for me that we get that proportion correct. And it's interesting for me that I decided to go with a more sketching type portrait with a very graphic background. But one of the ways that does end up looking really cool when you start to do some transparency, but one of the ways you can maybe change that is that when you fill in your color of your plane, you can actually use the side of a pencil and keep that sketchy too. So it's not just so solid graphic, like you are just perfectly disciplined in coloring in the lines in a coloring book. Some people like that look. I personally like layers of color and scratchy and sloppiness. So whatever your preference may be, move forward with that. So I'm going to go back to working on this face here. I always usually, me personally, will start with the eyes. And one of the reasons is it gives me a great control of my proportions, but it also knows whether or not I'm going to be in good shape moving forward. The eyes speak volumes about how you can capture a person's essence. And so if you don't get the eyes, chances are your whole drawing's not going to look like the person. And I'm saying that now because I'm doing this live, so what I produce for you may or may not actually end up looking like him. But I did work on another one earlier that it's getting close, but it's not my favorite. Part of it is I'm working on a lot smaller than I normally would. This is a small, whatever, 8x10 iPad. And I can zoom in, but even then, we run into issues. So I'm going to be looking at his eye here, and because we need to be able to share screen, I am going to add this layer. And bear with me here just a second. Don't panic. The reason why I'm doing this is I want to be able to really zoom in on his face to help us. And I'm gonna what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase. Hmm. So I'm doing this so that you can see what I'm drawing to the right. So I'm just taking that background of this image that we were able to zoom in on. Like that. So now we're here and you can see that I've got a more zoomed in face that we can really start to look into his eyes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the left eye, and I'm turning my paper a little bit. So I'm sorry for the screen. It may be a little bit hard for some of you folks, but I want to be able to see what I'm doing. And what we've got here is let's start with this little line. And a lot of people learn to draw portraits by learning the anatomy of the skull and of the muscular system of the face. Believe it or not, that is really beneficial to learn because you understand how our skin and our muscles lie on our skull and how each of us is unique in that way is how those muscles sit and twist around. And so it gives the shape and definition where the different flaps of cartilage of eyelids fall. It's just really interesting to learn that anatomy. The other thing is it's difficult to start drawing portraits from images like this because even though this is a really high quality photograph, it was still taken from really far away. So trying to get the actual details of his eye can be hard to come by. And when you're doing your initial drawing, you don't necessarily have to think about all your shadows at once. I normally do this in colored pencils, so I start building up my shadows with using layers of color. In charcoal or pencil, these quick drawings, you can use a lot of the side of your pencil to start filling in some of that dimension because you can go back through and you can erase. Especially in charcoal, you want to start establishing a tone to your base there, either by really light strokes. So this is just like real light strokes of my pencil versus a dark stroke, right? Or using the side of your pencil to create that sort of shading. So I'm going to erase all that. So one other thing to mention, I was painting a mural well, gosh, it's a couple of years now, I guess. And a fellow artist of mine pointed out that you have to remember our eyeballs. If you think about cartoons, you think of an eye like this, right? And you think of seeing the whole eyeball. Our eyeballs actually don't, for the most part, this is a generalization, but for the most part, we don't see the whole circle of the eyeball. Eyeball is a marble, right? Think of it as a marble that goes inside of the flap of your eye. So your eyelid actually falls over your eyeball and you only get to see that half moon, sometimes only a portion of it too. And so that's why you'll see the lines in there and your eyelids build up on top of that. You don't, and then you have that little shadow that comes out and you might see a little shadow here. Well, that's the bottom of your eyeball underneath the skin pushing it away. So if you're drawing eyes and it's not looking correct, take a look at whether or not your eyeball is this big giant sphere screaming out at you, or if you've got your eyelids hovering over it appropriately. The other part is knowing where your light source is coming from. So is going to be helpful not only with the pupil, because you'll have to see where the white of the eye is, meaning the white inside of the pupil. not not the white of the eye, but the white dot in a pupil. You guys may or may not have seen me draw that. And so on his face, I'm going to go with a different color here just to point something out. On the face reference photo we're looking at, on this side of why isn't it drawing? Oh, because it's on the top. Hang on a second. On this side of the face, it's darker, right? You see all those shadows, those cast shadows falling right in here, right in here. There's a cast shadow there, cast shadow to the left of that, and then to the left here. And then on this side, it's all light, right? Like you see lots of white on there, white, 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 white. So that means that the light is coming. I see a shadow up here. I'm thinking the light source is pretty much coming from this direction. So when I tell you that, it's because when you're thinking about shading, all of that comes into play with where your shadows fall. If you know where your light source is coming from, then you're going to be able to develop a more realistic image, because one of the things that people will notice about beginners is that they'll put a shadow here, right? And then they'll put the same identical shadow on the other side. But if the light's coming from here, there wouldn't be a shadow there. So keeping an eye out where your shadows fall based off of where your light source is, and know that that your shadows are all in the appropriate spots and that you're building dimension correctly. It comes more into play with things like objects and looking at how sometimes things that you think would look really three-dimensional aren't coming together. It's usually because the shadows are incorrect. So let's go back to the drawing and make sure I'm drawing, and let's get the right color lead again. And I'm looking at my time. We're at 8:47. We're doing pretty good. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. I want to make sure you guys can still see the reference drawing. And then I don't like looking at like hollow eyes, so I'll fill this in. There are some more detailed techniques to filling in eyeballs and how to properly do it so it looks correct. And where, again, in photos like these, it's hard to tell where the little white dot is, so I'm taking some artistic liberties myself. And if you're like me, you're going to get bogged down in all of these little details when you start out, depending on your style. Or like me, when I'm working in colored pencils, I'll spend probably a good couple hours on one eye, really just building up layers of color. But you need to remember to take a step back, to stop, pull back, very frequently actually, and don't get zoomed in on there, because what will happen is you'll be so fixated on this little tiny detail in here, and before you know it, your eye, you'll look out and you've drawn a little teeny tiny eye, and it's not in proportion with everything else. So don't be in such a rush to get all your tiny details. Those are going to work themselves out after you have your initial composition going. So we're going to go and build. And I'm just going to add some basic shadow here. I'll be able to go in later and remove some with the eraser, blend some with a, with like a stump blender. But this is just reminding me that we've got some shadows on this side. And not too much. If you're using a real pencil, I have the ability in this iPad to really, I have a lot of leeway with what I'm doing here. Actual pencil to paper is not as forgiving. And so don't start adding layers of, color like that. That's just gonna, you can't continue to develop that. Some people like line drawings. That's not what we're doing tonight. So don't get me wrong. There's a really great school that has like scribbly line drawings and really you're committing, basically. You're using ink and you're committing and you're going with it. And I think those drawings are extremely beautiful. That's not what we're doing tonight. So go pull this here. And so you can see I'm starting to build this eye. It it resembles his eye a little bit, but what I'll do is I'll check the angle. If I'm feeling like something is maybe if I need to make some modifications, I'll see, is this, if I draw a parallel line here, and you can see his eye sort of goes at an angle there, and then there's this angle here, right? So if I'm over here, do I have that angle going on? I'm going to have to build that in. I can see already. But you can check your angles like that. Obviously, not while actually drawing on your drawing. You can use the side of a paper, your pencil as reference. You can't see me and what I do with my pencil, so I'm showing you visually, but don't draw on your paper like that. But what I'll do is I'll remind myself, okay, I'm going to actually have to remember that as I start shading, he's got a really distinctive slant here, right? Like that sort of gives the personality to this glance. And then he's got this, you know, the crease of his nose right there is really, his brow is very distinct. So I'm going to go in and start building that brow. And you could start to see how that will develop. I can already tell you right now, his eye is more open in my drawing than actually on his face. So I'll probably go in and close that in a little bit. I might wait a little bit before I do that, just so I don't overcommit to closing it and then have to pull it back out. But looking at those types of details is where I guide myself. Then I'm going to start building in my outline of where the nose is. Now there's some different ways in which you can see how to build proportions on your nose. I'm going to show you one thing in color, and then I'm going to fast forward to my almost finished drawing, but to show you some proportions. If we look at his eye, right? So I'm going to put on either side of his eyes, and then there's the center, right, where his eyeball is. Now, if you look at the side of his nose here, and now remind you, he's at an angle. If we were looking straight on, these proportions would make more sense, but this is how you can make sure you keep your proportions in order. So you look at where his nose hits along. Usually the nose hits on the center of this eye right here, but he's at an angle, right? So you're going to push that back to the center. So that's when I'm lining my drawing up over here. I've got the first eye started. So I'm going to look and see, oh, okay, so that one's falling there. And then this is falling at the inside of his eye here. So I can make sure the other side of his nose is here. And then it goes down. Now this point at the end of his nose will line up at a triangle there, right? So if I do pull down a triangle here, then I know I have some idea of where this nose is going to fall, right? Now, the eye, you might be like, well, you haven't done the eye yet. Well, I just want to show you. This is one eye, the width of his eye, right? If we do that same width, 2, then there's another width, 3, 4, 5. And this is going to be foreshortened because his head is twisting back in space. So we've got 5 eyes across. And that's always good to know. So if you're looking at your nose and thinking, is there too much space apart? You'll want to double check when you're looking at your drawing to see if those measurements line up to people, but that's usually a good gauge of space. So I knew here approximately the other side of my eye was going to be here. So I could do that triangular motion. Now, the other thing is his mouth should line up with the center of his eye, except that we're foreshortened back. So it goes a little bit to the left of that. So that's going to be the end of his mouth down here. And then this is going to line up with the center of his eye here. So roughly here. So when you start lining this up, you can do it after you've given yourself some eyes you've already done the outline of your brow and your eye work. So I'm taking these off so that, since I didn't start a new layer on these. So our pilot doesn't look like a demon man too. Okay. So we can now go a little further. Do I have this one? So this is the one that I had started with a little bit of blue and black. I don't particularly like that one. So I'm going to go here and we'll take off. All right, so I'll get our other picture up. So if we look at our pilot here, I want to point out, wait, this isn't the good one. Oop. I want to point out a couple things on where I was telling you, thinking about proportions and where I messed up. I was really trying to put this together this afternoon, and I'm looking at it now after stepping back and after working on a drawing again. And I am going to point out a couple things that I see right off the bat that I did extremely wrong as far as proportions. Look at this forehead. I don't know why it's not drawing now. Look at this. You see that forehead? You see how big it is compared to here? There's too much there. So that needs to be brought down a little bit more. His eyes, I really need to go in and pull out a lot, and I'm starting to get the crease on the brow, but this eye needs to be thinned out a little bit. His nose is not in the right proportion, so I need to fix that a little bit. It needs to be just a little bit bigger. And it's long, right? Like it's long and a little bit bigger, so it might need to be dropped down. And I've been working on his mouth all day. He has a very distinct mouth and his teeth. And teeth, for those of you that don't do portraits very often, are very, 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 very difficult to do. So teeth and hands seem to be the most problematic areas, but his teeth were getting close. I need to finesse his lips. A lot of times, we didn't get into the lips, but a lot of times people will do a complete outline of lips and then start adding their shading. That's a mistake. You want to go in and sort of line that interior using negative space, and then you can start building up with delicate line work around to make the lips. Maybe we can spend a class on lips one day, but for the sake of tonight, this is where we're at. So his chin was bothering me this afternoon, and I was working on it before we started, and my system decided it wanted to crash on me, so I didn't get to really nurture it. But you get the idea. If you were to just look at the drawing and not his photo, you would get the idea that this is a pilot. You would understand, unless you're from unless you're from his family, you're not going to say that's not him at all. But that's not the case when you're doing portraits. You want it to actually look at like the person. For tonight's exercise, we're going to just chalk that up for a good practice. But then what we can do is, let me put that back on. I gotta find the other, must be this guy. So we're gonna leave that little plane down there, I think, and then I'm gonna start adding these silhouettes that I made earlier. So back to the silhouettes that we made. And I just realized that when I flattened everything, I lost a series of some of the silhouettes. So we'll just move some of these into play. And unfortunately, I screwed up my layers, so they're all going to be really faded, but that's okay because it's kind of interesting to see how you can make them sit on the face to just maybe add a little color to the portrait. And you know, we could maybe change the color of those planes to something different. And so it just adds maybe some shadow and character to his face. It doesn't necessarily look like there's a plane hovering on top of him. And then if we were going to build up another portrait, we could have this portrait. Let me make sure I have the right one set. So if we were to have drawn that, we could have that drawn. I'm gonna move it here. I just love the way he's looking toward us with this face. And then I'm gonna, you know, take that background out. So that's him in the background looking at us. And then we could take those planes again. Not those ones, not the next ones. And we can move those over. So the plane is at the heart of his eye and they just sort of fall onto each other. You can start playing with placement, see how it fits, how you want to go with it. And then maybe you decided you wanted to do this all on a colored piece of paper. But that's something you could think about if you have a portrait that's on a colored piece of paper and you know, you want it to be that sort of, here's him looking directly at you, and then here's him in the cockpit. You can play around with that. It's just something that I wanted you to think of. This isn't a final project by any way, shape, or form, but if we really start to think about how we can use graphic elements and layers of portraiture, you might get some really fun and surprising imagery. So I think I would encourage you to go to the blog post that has all the images, or you can go online if there's a specific type of craft in the military that tells the story of a veteran you know, or your story. Break it down into a silhouette, put it in some sort of pattern. You can also create patterns that aren't readable as a B-24, but make a really cool graphic in the background. It's still telling the story of this person's experiences, but just in a different and unique way. You could even try this with cutting the silhouettes out of magazines and collaging onto paper. That's really cool. You could find the picture, download the picture, cut him out, watercolor over him, collage it onto a background, and then cut these silhouettes out of magazines. Yeah, so I think that's going to be our good our lesson this week, or as you will, our drink and draw. For tonight, we're not going to be sharing drawings if that's okay with others, but please continue to send me. You can email me your drawings. I think, Eric, if we could use like the info email at education where people could send their drawings, then since I don't have my DVA email anymore, but folks can always get into contact with us through the event logo, or, you know, thank you all. Thank you, Teresa. I appreciate it. I hope that was fun and interesting. I always look forward to your feedback. There's the email. Eric just put it in the chat, visitor.curator@dva.wisconsin.gov. And if you have drawings you want to send me, I've been collecting a folder of them, and I'm hoping we can have a highlight reel here in the next couple of weeks of the courses over the last year and a half, 2 years. Thank you again, Melody. Thank you everybody for participating. I was glad to see a lot of familiar faces, and thank you, Margaret and Joe, for the pronunciation, koala. So Joseph F. Koala. Thank you very much. And I'm going to toss it over to Eric so he can talk to you guys about our upcoming events for the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. Thanks again, and feel free to let me know what you guys thought.
I look forward to seeing that highlight reel, Yvette.
Yeah, I was looking through the drawings today, actually, and there's some pretty fun drawings
Awesome.
from the past.
Yeah, and since we've kind of ramped up our security a little bit, I think that'd be a nice touch to go through and just create a video, and yeah, that'd be awesome.
I agree. Like, I think people make some really fun drawings, and it was fun when we were able to share, but I think I respect everybody that's viewing more to not have that, so we can always share on the
better safe than sorry. Unfortunately, there's people out there that want to ruin everyone else's good time. Thanks everybody tonight for showing up. We are getting a lot of great comments, so it's apparent that everybody had a good class. Thanks again, Yvette, for always your wonderful instruction, and Molly for showing up, putting in your time tonight. We appreciate it. And of course, you can find all of our events at witsvetsmuseum.com/events. Our next event that is coming up, July is a little light. We have a book talk coming up on the 18th of this month with William Woolley, and he's going to be talking about his new book. And then also, of course, keep your eyes open for our upcoming cemetery tour announcements. We're working hard on that, and those are going to be the first week of October. They are a popular portion of the event calendar here at the museum. And so if you want to get in on those, you need to do it soon after the announcements are made. Those tickets go fast. So thanks, everybody. I hope everybody has a great weekend. I hope you have wonderful weather just like we're going to have here. And we'll see you next month.